Okay, welcome board members, staff, and general public to the weekly legislative meeting of Utah State Board of Education. We are here in person at the state capitol. We have a phone option that I believe has been publicized. And we have a quorum, so we will begin. First item of business is basically just to cover a little bit about the legislative session and our process. Sorry? Oh. Appreciate Kelsey and Angie, others, for putting together this kind of outline to what we're doing here as board members while we're on the Hill and during the session. So feel free, please, board members, go ahead. I think we just raise hands here. We don't have, I've got a complicated little system up here, but is this for raising hands to speak? Yes. Okay. Point of order.
Mr. Chair, I'm getting a text from Sarah asking if we can hear them on the speakerphone. Can we test that system?
Yeah, good question. So, Sarah, can you?
Oh, you can test. Oh.
I am here. Can you guys hear us?
Yeah, we got you.
That's Sarah.
Welcome.
And
Awesome.
I am here.
Thank
This is
you.
Board Member Booth.
Okay, we were going to do a roll call. I apologize. I should have started with that. So let's do that first, and that'll help us test the system too. So let's see. Where's our? We've had a. Oh, here we go. Sorry. All right. Member Bogus. Member Booth.
I'm here.
Thank you, Randy. Member Klein. Yes. Member Davis.
Here.
Member Earl.
Here.
Member Green. Member Green. Okay. Member Hart.
Here.
Member Hymas. Here. Member Carey. Member Carey. Don't have Joe. Okay. Member Lear. Yeah. Member Moss is here. Member Norton. Here. Member Reel.
Here.
We heard yeah. Member Straight. Here. And Member Wood. Yes. All right. Thank you. So we may be upgrading to a different version of hybrid. We're still working that through, but glad this has worked, and we appreciate greatly the legislature for making this available to us. All right, so we're just going to walk through mostly the approach to the session and how we will review bills, legislation, how we might handle other board business. Starting next week, we might have, probably will have action items proposed for bills. Now that bills are actually becoming public, we can tee those up. And I'll just kind of walk through a little bit of that process. So first of all, logistically, please wear your USBE badge or name tag when you come to the Capitol, which I am not doing. Apologies. Member Straight's got his. So we'll be better about that next time and make sure that folks know who we are as we wander the halls, and especially if we're going to be present at committee meetings. So for these legislative meetings, it's expected that all board members will attend the meetings. Again, we're hoping to have a virtual hybrid option starting next week. Please let Sybil know if you're going to be using the call-in number in advance, as our board members are today. Text either Sybil or a non-chairing member of the leadership to let you know if you have a comment or question and wish to weigh in. That's for the folks on the call-in system. For those here, either raise your hand or light it up, and I look like we have. Are these? Okay. Are we supposed to turn that off?
That's what Sid said.
Sorry, folks. We're all learning the system. There we go. Okay. We'll get there. We have the three of us. We'll figure it out. But feel free to just raise your hand, of course. So, all right. So for committee meetings, that is legislative committee meetings. I think board members know that there are appropriations meetings that address the education budget. Then there's the House Standing Education Committee and the Senate Standing Education Committee that deal with policy. And policy bills will often have a fiscal component. If there's funding required, that requires a fiscal note. This is probably old news, but just for those who might not have been through that process, if a bill goes directly to the budget, goes to appropriations, they address it. We've submitted our 10 top priorities that the board voted on starting last year. That PEA process started this morning, and was that this morning? That was this morning. Yesterday, excuse me. Time flies. Yesterday was the first PEA meeting, and so we had an opportunity to present the board's 10 voted budget priorities to that committee, and then had some discussion about it, and then had that legislative breakfast that most of you attended this morning, and got another shot to explain those priorities. So that PEA committee goes on, I think they have 8 meetings, and during that process, they'll consider our proposals. They have the governor's budget. They have other specific appropriation items that are put in by legislators. And so some of those come from the community, from stakeholders. Ours, of course, are in the mix, and we encourage you all to support those 10 that we've already presented and voted upon. And we've been doing that, had some good meetings with the leadership of PEA, leadership of House standing, leadership of Senate standing. So board members are welcome to attend those. That's the PEA side. Going to the standing side, that's the policy bills. If there's a cost associated with the policy bill, then they ask for a fiscal note. That's where you go to the agency that's affected and you ask, how much is this reasonably going to cost, likely going to cost? And our agency puts together their calculation of what the bill will cost to implement, sends it back to that committee, and then they vote on those policy bills. So board members are welcome to any and all of those, and Kelsey James is going to be sending out a weekly email which includes a schedule of committee meetings for the following week. So again, that will include both the appropriation side and the House and Senate ed standing side. The appropriations is a combined committee between the House and the Senate. Information about the legislature, le.utah.gov is the best way to get notifications of scheduled committee meetings and agendas. Pretty user-friendly website, the calendar's up there. As we get deeper into the process and they start having floor time, you'll see the whole floor calendar, which bills have come out of committee. And that gets pretty complicated, but again, it is pretty user-friendly. So you can select education committees. The front menu allows you to customize that to see what committees you want to watch, which calendars you want to see, and which bills you want to track. So if you haven't tried that already, that's a good opportunity to have things customized so that you know what's going on with the bills that you're most interested in. You can access the live stream or archived video footage of committee meetings. That's available, again, pretty user-friendly, and you'll see on each committee agenda, the membership, the agenda, and the backup documents are right there online to pull up. Any questions, you can reach out to Deputy Stallings or Kelsey James about using that legislative website, and especially about customizing it. And we'll talk a little bit about the bill tracker. I think that came up before, but that's a huge help to us board members that come from our own staff, from Angie and others. There's also the opportunity to customize your own legislative bill tracker at the website. So if you have things that you see that interest you that might not be on our tracker, you can use that approach as well. All right, so during each of these legislative meetings, again, starting next week, we'll have action items. We have some great discussion items today to go through the process and a couple of bills. But board members will have the opportunity to bring forward motions for the board as a whole to formally support or oppose bills. That, of course, is a recommendation. It is a statement of board support or lack of support for a bill, which then kind of goes into the hopper with legislators' considerations of other stakeholders' positions. So the strategy of the board in the past has been not to take a formal position on too many bills. It's not required. On some cases, they are bills that we have requested, and I spoke with the legislator this morning about one of those. And so they will sometimes come in and present the bill and ask for formal support. We don't have to do it, and sometimes saving our position for a few bills that we feel most strongly about makes it more powerful statement that we've considered, reviewed, and want to express our support. If we weigh on too many bills, this is again just a strategy call, but it's kind of been the position of past leadership as I understood it, which I think makes sense. You weigh in on too many bills, it kind of weakens the position. So any questions on that element? Okay. Speaking on behalf of the board, in committee meetings, the board positions will be shared by a member of board leadership or a member of the superintendency. And again, we had that opportunity in PEA yesterday. Great chance to share the positions that we all voted on. In select situations, the board leadership might designate a specific board member to speak to the board's position in a specific committee meeting. So if we've taken a position of support and a board member has a particular interest or background or experience in working up that position, approach us or the superintendency, and that might be, an opportunity for a board member to speak on behalf of the board. Second part is the more delicate part, and the part we have to make sure we all keep in mind as we come up here, that when we're speaking as an individual, for example, a public comment at a meeting or discussion with the legislature, we can introduce ourselves as a member of the board, but we need to make clear that we are not speaking in our official capacity on behalf of the board, and that's board policy 1004. So I would encourage everybody to, 2004. So encourage everybody to review that board policy. And if the board has taken a position on the subject that we're discussing, it's very important to mention the board's position. You could say the board supported that, but in my individual capacity, I have a slightly different opinion. It's very important to make that distinction, though. So you would mention the board's position and then speak to your own opinion and clarify that as your own. And that makes the best of both of those opportunities. We are united in those things that we have voted for and want to keep that very clear. Any questions on any of that, either process or rule? So it's a great opportunity for those who have been here. I know a lot of us have been engaged in legislation in different fashion, and you'll see stakeholders here out in the audience today and elsewhere that have a wealth of knowledge. I think one of the best things about the legislative session is the people you bump into on the Hill that are passionately engaged in education and have different perspectives on things. And so encourage you to just seek people out. They might seek you out, but it's a great learning experience as well as a great opportunity to advocate for our schools and for our agency. So, okay, there's no more questions about the general overview. I think we can turn to Deputy Superintendent Jones. Let's see. For the budget.
Let's see. Yes, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. Day 3 of the legislative session, and PEA met yesterday for their first time. And as part of the agenda during the Public Education Appropriations Committee, the legislative fiscal analyst went over the base budget. And so what I'm going to do here with you is walk those board members that weren't privy or didn't attend and couldn't see this, because it is the starting point. The public education-based budget is critical to knowing where we're starting off as far as public education funding goes, so that as we move together through this session, we're all very clear on where we started with our funding. So with that, Greg's driving. If you could scoot that over here just a little bit too, so I can see that. Thank you. Can everybody see the? Well, it's not up yet. Okay. Do you want me to wait till? It is showing on your screen? Oh, okay, good. Okay. Yep. So when I scroll, they see it, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Got it. Okay, we're good. Okay. How do I? Yeah, let's see. Just like this. Oh, this way. Okay. Okay. What I thought, in the interest of consistency, so that the message that the legislative fiscal analysts send is the same message that I send to you as the board, that is the same message that goes out to the public, again, on where we stand with the base budget at the beginning of the legislative session. essentially, SB 1 is the bill that establishes the base budget. There are some actions or activities that take place prior to the start of the legislation in the Executive Appropriations Committee, and I'll get to those specifically here in a minute, that really set up or establish some very specific details within what is or becomes the public education base budget bill. With that, the base budget has all of the elements that you're used to hearing about: stabilization account, the inflationary adjustment, the establishment, if you will, of all of those types of requirements by law or Amendment G that occurred, in the past. And I'll dive down into those a little bit more too. I'm on slide 3 now. The key takeaway from this slide is to your right, where it says the state budget, and then it provides the revenue estimates. So remember, as we started our process in early May or in May with the Finance Committee, it's culminating here now with the fact where you started identifying what you, as the board, prioritizes your funding needs or requests for public education across the state, resulting in October, your submission to the governor's office. Inevitably, as part of that process, board members, and rightfully so, are always like, well, where are we at with revenue? Where are we at with revenue? And I continually and consistently say that we really don't know for sure until right up to the beginning of the legislative session. It's really in EAC in December that we start to get an indication of where we are with revenue. So what the LFA provides here on this slide is what's available to the whole state. But then again, onto the right here, as you look down into this, you see that last bullet that says available revenue. So that's pretty much, there's two arrows in there, so that says subcommittee allocation. So that last bullet is pretty much what's been allocated to the Public Education Appropriations Committee to apply to or provide for public education funding when they ultimately make their recommendations on what their funding requests are, what they advise EAC fund towards as we get closer to the end of the session. And in the interest of time, I'll keep moving. If you have questions, Chair, please feel free to stop me. The next slide here, as I said or stated earlier, is a good depiction of where we stand early in the session as it relates specifically to the statutory required education area inflation adjustment. Our staff works closely with the legislative fiscal analysts and representatives from the governor's office to provide the formulatic determination of what that percentage is. It's based on the consumer price index. They back out food and fuel factors, and then again, that percentage is calculated on a 5-year rolling average. So this year, it results in a 3.4% increase to the value of the WPU. They also, too, they satisfy or establish the Public Education Economic Stabilization Account. So key takeaways from this slide are again to the right for the base adjustments that occur as a result of those statutory requirements, the 3.4% and the adjustment or funding of the Economic Stabilization Account. By law, the legislature is required to maintain a particular level in the Economic Stabilization Account. Then whatever's in excess of that amount can be made to public education as one-time funds. Well, that's what we had last year, was one-time funds, and that resulted in such funding from last year, such as the $91.1 million for capital improvements, $64 million for the teacher prep days, etc. So obviously that'll develop more along this line too. So here are what has been done to the base budget, the adjustments and technical corrections for your review. Key takeaway from this is we've reached the 5-year point with the unfreezing of the basic rate. So that was 0.0016. Right now we're looking approximately at 0.0013 will be right around that would be the new basic rate, but we'll track that and make sure we're all clear on precisely what that is. So you see in the first bullet there, I've already, pretty much addressed this. There's that budget stabilization requirement. You get the restricted account adjustments that take place, including attention to the school land trust program itself. To the right are those technical corrections. As was mentioned in PEA yesterday, and Chief of Staff Young is the lead on the performance measures. Those will follow in subsequent PEA meetings. Those are your performance measures, and then they'll be addressed in future PEA meetings. So here's how you navigate the base budget bill. And these are just, it's quite extensive. If you have had an opportunity to see how many pages it is, it's complex. But these are the key takeaways that both Ben and I feel that, well, obviously what Ben felt, public education committee legislative participants need, and what you need as the board as well, so that you can look at the base bill, but then refer to these particulars from it, so that it further provides you the information and baseline data, if you will, of where we're starting with the base budget. As we progress along this, there's multiple pages to this. This is where you get the details in the base budget for such programs as our minimum school program, the particular line items and where we're starting for funding, from the previous year, leading into the establishment again of the base budget. So just as a quick example, and I felt good about this too, look at the kindergarten, the amount of WPUs for there. So that's our starting point. And as you all know, you have a priority request to fund or increase funding ongoing for full day kindergarten and move it above the line. So, this essentially provides you this baseline, if you will, of where particular programs are at the funding levels they are right now, and then subsequent to moving together through the process. I'll just move through these really quick. That acronym PED, so I'm on page 5. That acronym where it says PED, Base Bill Restricted Fund Transfers. PED stands for public education. It's just a code. It's not it's an abbreviation for public education. But what it does do is let you know that these are transfers that are within the PED or the public education realm or budget itself. So those are for your review as well. Here's where, with these transfers, we take into account all of the information and data that we receive, like on local property tax revenue. All those take key are essentials to how the base budget bill is established and how the base budget begins. Then here again are the performance measures and the requirement for those. Again, we'll develop those as we progress together through this process with PEA. This particular slide here that I'm on right now, I do want to just pause and kind of hover over this a little bit longer than I have the other slides. Key takeaways from this are, here we get the initial appropriations, the adjustments. Then we also get the third bullet there on the right that says the appropriation is nearly $7 billion in FY24. And then it breaks down, because we've had board members ask questions about general fund, income tax fund, those types of details. This is a really relevant slide too, as far as item number 3, which gives you some additional information on the repeal of what I said earlier is what currently was frozen at 0.0016 or the basic levy, which definitely affects our LEA or our districts. So here are some of the basics behind public education that Ben had provided. I'm just, I'm going to just pause or stop here with my presentation, Chair, because, again, this was mainly focused on the base budget itself, but this is part or an integral part of the presentation on the base budget bill, but it's just for your review. I won't progress through these slides if that's okay with you in the interest of time. So subject to your questions or concerns or any from the board members, that concludes my overview of the base budget bill and where we stand, which is in a really good place as far as the beginning, if you will, of the budget for public education.
Thank you very much, Deputy Jones. Any questions? I have one, but others first. Member Vargas or Member Klein? I'm sorry, I'm learning which lights are whose. That's you. Okay. You're on.
So Superintendent Jones, maybe I missed it. You said the minimum in the stabilization account, and you said a dollar amount, but I didn't.
140 million right now is where it's at in the economic stabilization account. And then from there, they can take a portion and provide it to us. They have to, I think it's 11%. It's maxed out right now. Yeah, at 140 million.
What is the minimum dollar amount that's listed in extant code?
It has to be 11. It's not a minimum dollar amount. It's a percentage of the revenue that we bring in. So it's 11%, I think, 11% of the income tax proceeds.
Do you happen to know offhand what that number is?
I don't. I'd have to follow up with you on how much. I have it, but I don't want to.
No, that's fine. I just was
Yeah.
wondering. I thought you had said it and I missed it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or from Vice Chair Earl?
It is in the slide.
Still up?
No, I don't think so.
I had a question. I think it's slide 3, if I remember right.
Actually, I might be able to answer Board Member Boggess's question. I think they did actually put the calculation in there about 11%. I just can't remember what it is, but go ahead, ma'am.
Do you have slides? Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Maybe I
I'm not sure who actually, do you
Okay.
display it or? pull it
So my
up?
question is
Okay.
just on the base
Can you put the slide?
adjustments. It's slide number 5. It talks about the performance measures. Are those, but if I understand right, those aren't built into this base bill. Is that correct?
No, there's no performance measures that were built into this at this time, ma'am.
Okay, those
Because,
were,
yeah, and I will defer to Chief of Staff Young for clarity on that. But my understanding, they didn't put them in there yet because we haven't presented them yet. So that's my understanding.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions from board members? I wonder if maybe you could just do a little bit more explanation about the local levy, the guarantee and how that ties into state funding. That's
Right.
what I still have questions about. And
Okay.
maybe just a brief overview might help when you're talking about
Sure.
increasing the rate and what's the structure there, which part's local, how does it translate into state dollars that go back?
Okay.
And what's the effect of unfreezing?
Yeah, yes, sir. And what I'll do too is try to the best of my ability, follow how Ben explained it yesterday, which was really well. So we've had this rate, this 0.0016, and I'll relate it to the basic rate. So, LEAs are required to, and you see it on your tax statement. I mean, we all get it. I live in Davis County. It says 0.0016 for the basic rate to bring in this revenue. So as a result of a combination of the basic rate and whatever local levies and board levies, which they differ between, local and board levies differ on the amounts or percentages they charge, those types of things too. What we've seen recently is a marked increase in local revenue coming in. So then by law and then the application of the formula, what that results in inevitably is less of an amount provided by the state. So as revenue from these levies, basic rate, local and board levies is brought in on the local level, you see a reduction in the amount of state money that's provided, state guarantee, they call it state guarantee money that's provided to the LEAs, right? And it's all driven by, and it relates a lot to timing, right? So we have this process called the mid-year update. So as we get more data in, and then we get to the end of the year and we get actual tax data and what was collected, it subsequently affects how much is provided by the state to the LEAs in this state guarantee application, if you will. So does that answer your question, sir? Or?
Yeah, thank you. And for board members, this is just something that I didn't know until I got on the board, to be honest, that there's a requirement that the local LEAs exert a certain minimum level of tax effort, meaning
Yes.
they ask their citizens to provide that level of tax. There's one that's voted by the board. There's another one that you have to put out to a vote by the people. And if you don't meet that minimum requirement, then you don't get state funding, or you get less of it. If you
Right.
do, and you have a low tax base, and then you've tried your best to meet that, you tried your best by meeting that minimum tax rate, then state money comes into you. And so as that goes up and down, the state money can go back and forth. There's a chart that you'll see that shows who's recipients and who are the providers of that money into the guarantee that goes back to those districts that have a tougher time raising funding. I hope I didn't butcher that. But that's
No,
that's
no,
the
that's
basic
even better than I said.
layman's background, if I could, because some of that, when you see the unfreezing of a rate, you think, well, what's that got to do with us? It's local taxes, right? But that's the correlation. Okay, any other?
So I'm just trying to understand, so the guarantee, if they're, I don't know if they're surplus is the right word, but if the effort isn't needed in the local district, so in other words, if they've met their max, right?
If they've met their minimum effort,
Or their minimum effort,
mhm, then,
on.
yeah, well, but.
So then, is
yeah.
there a point where the state does not meet that guarantee because it reaches a,
Yes, ma'am. And there are some districts, for example, that not only are they meeting their minimum effort, but, you know, when you go into the depths of the formula, not only are they meeting their minimum effort, but they're also bringing in so much revenue that, you know, when we do the calculation and all the comparatives that Dell and Sam and school finance do, it still results in them not getting state money. So,
okay,
you know, and I would have to do that on a one each basis with you to show you, you know, how it's it, but that's how that works.
I understand that component. It's,
Mhm.
does there end up being a surplus in the guarantee if a number of districts meet their, does that make sense?
Yeah,
And if that,
okay,
does that
yeah.
surplus get put back out, or is it held for the next year?
That is a good question. So what we do is we do the adjustments so that to your question, it does get put out, but I would have to demonstrate to you or show you an example of what that looks like, right?
Irrelevant.
Because it could be transferred, there could be transfers done at this level. You can't do it as a board, but, you know, there could be transfers of that money. And Deborah's nodding her head north and south, so that's a good sign.
Okay.
So, you know, so yes, it goes back out, but there also could be transfers, and, you know, I would have to pretty much break that down for you.
Okay,
on one
just
screen.
curious
Okay,
on
yeah.
the surplus
I think
component.
you're right, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for, is that Member Wood and Member Norton?
Yeah.
You're both on.
Okay, should I go ahead?
Yes.
A quick question on, you said that as the local amount increases, the amount of state, am I not?
No,
It
green
might
light's
be one next to
on.
you.
Let's see.
This one? Right. This green light is on.
Is your red light on?
Let's try it again.
Oh, green light.
Do I need to get closer?
I got you, sorry.
So I am not long enough from. So you said as the local effort increases, then the amount that comes in from the state will decrease. As we're eliminating that freeze, will that mean that we will require more state funding than we have in the last 5 years?
So conceivably, yes. I do want to make sure that I emphasize that the basic rate is just one component of the overall taxing. So you can know, any of us, you know, in a layman's sense could estimate that a reduction of the basic rate would result in increases of state money to them. How much, though, is still dependent on a lot of other factors, but the short answer is yes, ma'am. So.
But we maintain the level. Sorry, but we maintain the level, right?
We do.
From year to year, so it's not really,
When you say the level, ma'am, what do you mean by that?
not the rate, but the
Yeah,
funding
there's a
that comes in is
basic
the
amount of
same.
money
Yeah,
that
the
has to
funding
be,
is
yes.
the same, so it doesn't decrease that, it's the,
Yeah, so we maintain a certain level of money, but there is conceivably, you would see, you know, a lowering of this and an increase of this, right? But how much that is, there's a lot of other factors that play into that. So, and it's important because a lot of times the public gets focused on the basic rate because they see that on their tax, but they also see the local and the board levies, right? So whenever a taxpayer calls me, which is a lot, right, I always ask them to pull out their, because I get calls from all different counties, right? So I only know Davis County, or I see, because I live there. So I ask them to walk me through that. Then I can see where they're at, and it typically goes well. They feel like they've been more informed than ever because, you know, they have a better or clearer understanding of their board and local levies. So,
Member Norton?
Yes, and just to clarify, this has to do with school districts as opposed to charters when we're talking about these.
So yes. So however, then enter in the local replacement fund, right? Which my understanding, I mean, it was created, well, about the time I was coming on here. It was because charter schools don't have taxing capacity like districts do that we created the LRF, Local Replacement Fund, to help them, yes, or to fund them.
Any other questions from board members? I've learned that there are 5 or maybe 6 people who fully understand education. Deputy Jones is one of
It's
them.
complicated, it is, so.
Hit up Jay Blaine over there with the
Yeah.
UEA. He's
Yeah.
one of them. Amber
Well,
Schill back
hopefully-
there. He's got a pretty good handle on. But there's a lot of moving pieces.
There
So
is.
we greatly appreciate Deputy Jones, and feel free to follow up. I'm still pinging him with questions about every
Sure.
other week. So
Yeah, and I will follow up with Board Member Bogus on her specific question. I think I have that, so, yeah.
thank you very much. Okay, any further questions? I think next item then. Thank you, Deputy Jones. We will turn to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings for review of legislation.
Right. Good afternoon, board members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. At this point of the meeting, if you look in the backup for Civic Clerk, there may be times when we'll have a legislator who will join us, and that's why you will see 3.1 and it says information legislator review of bills. Just wanted to, if it wasn't apparent, we do not have any legislators joining us today, but I do anticipate there may be opportunities in the future where legislators will join. So the second item on Civic Clerk is just really an information item for now. If there were a policy request that staff were requesting or somebody else were requesting, that item could turn into an action item, but generally during the session, we don't see many requests for policy change or requests for bills coming up. So as requested by Board Member Bogus and others, if you look, you'll see the list of policy requests with a bill at the beginning of the explanation. So if one of our policy requests has been incorporated into a bill and been numbered, you will see the bill number there with a link to the bill. And every week we will update that as the bills are numbered. So we'll keep that updated each week. And then the third item, 3.3, is where we, Greg and I, will review a list of bills. And you can see in backup, there are 2 documents uploaded there. The first one is a list of bills. Today, the first 2, I believe, are HB 215 and SB 1. Deputy Jones just reviewed SB 1, so we won't be reviewing that. We'll consider that checked off. And then you'll see a number of bills after that. I wanted to just bring to your attention that the bills that are listed there that are bolded, those bills are bills that we requested that are related to our requests for statutory change. And we will, so once we've reviewed bills, we will then move those to the bottom of the list and just state that the board has reviewed these bills. If a bill changes, for example, if we have a first substitute or second substitute, we may bring that back up. We'll work with board leadership. Sometimes the substitutes are very minor and we wouldn't necessarily recommend reviewing it again with the board. Other times substitutes are very significant. So, and then the second document there is the tracking sheet. It's an updated version of the tracking sheet. And again, just as a reminder, we do post our tracking sheet publicly on the USBE website under the legislative session page. So now I will start by, we'll go to the first bill on our list, which is HB 215, and funding for teacher salaries and optional education opportunities. I will start out with a very short, simple summary, and then depending on how much you'd like me to, I can go through the bill in a bit more detail in chunks by line number. So I'll start with a short summary, and then I might look to you, Chair, or other board members to let me know if that's sufficient or if you would like me to go into more detail. And an example of the detail that I'd be happy to go into is, for example, to cover the definition of an eligible expense. I could tell you what those eligible expenses are, or if you had a question of that nature. So first I'll start with a short summary, then I'll let you tell me or direct whether you want more detailed information. So in general, oh yeah, why don't you go ahead and put the, oh yeah, could you, thank you. And then if you'd like, you could actually go to the bill. This is the bill list you saw just a minute ago. That's the bill list we're working from. But Greg will go ahead and pull up the bill. So this bill does two major things. Number one is it establishes the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program to begin July 1, 2024. There are elements, though, of the bill that would start immediately, and USBE would be in the process of rulemaking, for example, as well as selecting through a request for proposals process a program manager. But the way the bill is listed is the bill now would allow the scholarships to start flowing to families and students beginning with the 24-25 school year. The second major thing that this bill does is it increases funding for the educator salary adjustment. What the educator salary adjustment is it's currently an existing program, a stipend or bonus for educators. It's $4,200, and this bill would add an additional $4,200. And some of you may have heard the number $6,000 when talking about it before the bill was drafted. The $6,000 comes from the $1,800 that's reserved to support benefits related to the $4,200. So this bill would double the current amount of the ESA, educator salary adjustment, from $4,200 to a total of $8,400. So that's the two major things. Now, some of the other short summary highlights that I would share with you is that the scholarship recipients are eligible for up to $8,000 beginning with the 24-25 school year. That amount would increase each year following, so beginning with the 25-26 school year, for example, that amount would increase by the percentage that the legislature appropriates for the WPU. So if the legislature appropriates a 5% increase, the $8,000 would increase by 5%. Eligible students are selected on a random basis, meaning it's not first come, first served, but it states in the bill that it would be a random selection. However, if there are not enough funds to cover the amount of scholarships or applications for scholarships, there is a preference first for students whose families make their household income is at 200% of the poverty level or below, and then the second preference to families whose income is between 200 and 555% of the federal poverty level. And then everybody else above 555 would be third tier, so to speak. The other, let's see what other things, some of the things I just wanted to bring to your attention that USBE is required to do. Number one, significant rulemaking, including rulemaking around an appeals process. So if the program manager denies an expense or denies a student enrollment, then there is an appeals process that we would manage at USBE, meaning the appeals would be made to USBE. Should I stop?
If I could,
Yeah.
we have a question from Member Lear, I believe.
I admit to chatting while you were giving your introduction. Are we supposed to wait till the very end, or can we ask it when it's timely?
I think it's either way, right?
That's fine.
For questions, you're saying?
Right, it's
Yeah,
just a question.
yeah.
So my question is about, and it just struck me, the low income And I don't want to hijack, so I won't take long. And if you want us to wait after this, then that's fine. I'll stop.
Well, I may recommend, I only had 3 more bullets to finish the short summary. Would you like me to finish that
Go
quickly?
ahead.
Or,
That's great. Thanks.
okay.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
interruption.
So I was just, the one bullet is USBE duties are rulemaking. We will be facilitating appeals. And just for your information, what would that look like? We did a fiscal estimate that if 5% of students or families appealed, that would be 150 students. So that could be 150 appeals a year. That's just an estimate. It just gives you a frame of reference of what we're talking about. It requires us to provide information on our website and to update an overview. And I think that's it on the USBE side. The other 2 points I just wanted to point out is that the program manager, again, we would be selecting that program manager, and the deadline in there is for October 1, 2024. I wanted to bring to your attention that that is a very aggressive RFP timeline. We would need to have all of our rulemaking done before the RFP process could begin. RFPs of this magnitude would probably normally take at least 6 months. So that means we need to get the rulemaking done very quickly, and then the RFP process would start. Speaking of the magnitude of the RFP, this is a $42.5 million program, and approximately $1 million for the first year, and then up to 5% of the appropriation can be used for the program manager to manage the program. And so that gives you an idea. I'm not as great at math as Deputy Jones, but 5% of 41.5 or 42.5, I would believe is about 2.5 million could be used by the program manager for administration, leaving the other approximately 40 million for scholarships, assuming they use all of that. And that's it. That's the short summary.
Back to Member Lear.
Thank you. Now I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. First of all, you mentioned the low-income preference, the students coming from low-income families, and who would do that review? Would it concerns me that somehow that information would have to go to the program manager, who then would ask for financial information to prove how poor you are. Is that what it would look like?
And I don't know if you could go just maybe do find and do 555 because you'll get there quickly. I believe it's the program manager, and I believe that information would be submitted to the program manager because I did not notice that being a duty that USBE would be required to do. And so, yeah, I'm assuming all of that information would go to the program manager as part of the application. And maybe I'm not the program manager, but I'm trying to channel what if I were the program manager in the application, I might say, are you eligible for a preferred preference to get in?
And then they'd ask for
And then they'd
W-2s?
then ask them the information if the family wanted the preference. That's my guess.
Okay. I'll restrain myself with comments. And then another related question. There's 5%, which is, I think, typically called an indirect cost. That I guess that's a okay phrase to use, that the program manager would get to manage the program. It's my recollection that usually when the USBE gets federal funds or the USBE is directed to manage a program, usually our limitation, even with COVID funds, tell me if I'm remembering right, I thought it was like 1% or 2% that the USBE could use for indirect costs or 5 just seems high to me.
Do you want to say something, Scott? I don't have an answer to that.
If Sarah's here, Sarah would know. When our COVID funds, how much could be, how much indirect cost money did we keep from the COVID funding we got from the Fed?
Either, if you want to
I won't hold
if you want to call a friend, we have Deputy Jones.
And
Either one, okay.
And I'm looking and nobody's going to hold you to this or say you said it was 1.2%. I might just want to see what you recall.
Yes. So Sarah Young, Chief of Staff. In terms of the COVID funds we received, it was 0.5% that was available for state administrative costs for each of the ESSER and GEAR awards.
Okay, that's my recollection. That's a really significant amount of administrative money. So that is interesting. And then one other question in there, Angie, that's related to that. And I can't remember seeing this in the bill, but I'm assuming then that money would be used to staff an office that would run this and add to the government bureaucracy, right? You don't have to answer the last part.
Well, it would be there to staff an office, but they wouldn't be a government entity, so it wouldn't be government bureaucracy.
Only
That's
quasi.
joking.
Look,
It would be the program manager's office, and I think that's for marketing, advertisement. So there are other things as well, but it's broad. So it doesn't say only this much for salaries or only this much, or at least this amount for marketing.
Okay.
So it's broad, but it would be for them to staff.
And then just one more, if I can. That's
Sure, we've
similar.
got Member Hart on deck.
And so we talked first before, and then also there's nothing in the bill yet about a fiscal note yet, but we don't know if the USBE will get any money for the USBE's assigned duties, do we, or do we not?
We do. It did say. One FTE? Okay. So I'm channeling a friend, as you all heard, you probably heard his answer. We have one FTE that has been granted. Right?
No, we've asked.
But is it in the fiscal note? I didn't see it in there.
We asked for it. Do we get it? No, we don't. It's just what we've asked for.
Okay. So may I respond?
Please.
What Deputy Jones is referring to is when a bill comes to our office, they request a fiscal note. And that is when we would share with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's office the staffing that we believe we would need to support the program. And I believe that is what Deputy Jones is referring to, is that we requested one FTE to oversee and be the point person to help with appeals, all the duties in here. But I looked at the fiscal note, and again, that's why I would love Deborah and Scott to give their feedback, but I did not see anything in there that appropriated funds to the Utah State Board of Education for administration or an FTE. But maybe that would come at a later date as part of the final budget bill.
Thank you.
Superintendent Dixon. Oh, I gotta hit you. Let's see. Do they try that?
There you go. All right. Thank you, Chair Moss, Cindy Dixon, State Superintendent. In the discussion we had about the fiscal note, I so appreciate staff working on the fiscal note. They did an amazing job. And then we came together in a subsequent meeting to say, what are we missing? And kind of went through all of the lines. To your point, Board Member Lear.
I've got a list here.
We did, and I think you had sent in some questions ahead of time that prompted some of the conversation. We did talk about the needs of the agency would likely increase over time. So on the front end, when it's being set up, like contracting to put out the RFP for the program manager, or some of those things we could probably absorb, but over time, in a couple of years, it could end up being one or even two FTE. So we also put that in the narrative and have had conversations with the LFA's office, just to say, as you're looking at this, because whatever we put in the fiscal note does not mean that's the way it appears. There's also work that happens at the LFA's office to make their own judgments based on what we've submitted. So over time, there might be an increase in the needs, and we would want to go back and adjust that. So we have asked up front, and alerted maybe is the better word, alerted up front that there could be a greater need in 2025, Angie, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Correct.
Thank you, Chair Moss.
Thank you. And just one final on process. Once the fiscal note is in, it needs to be approved in EAC to be included in the final bill of bills, right? So it goes into The standing committee that's hearing the policy bill has a fiscal note attached that proceeds to the executive appropriations committee with the fiscal note. They're looking at the entire budget from all the agencies at that point. They say, here's this, the bill passed, it came with this fiscal note. Do we approve or do we modify? That's where we find out if we got what we wanted in the fiscal note, right? Okay.
Yes, there's,
Roughly, go ahead and clarify.
well, it sometimes it'll end up in the bill of bills, but there are sometimes in a bill like this where they might have a fiscal note, they might in the fiscal impact explicitly state something like, and $150,000 to the State Board of Education to support administration of the program. And that's why I'm saying I didn't see in here. This fiscal note does have a large fiscal impact. It's got 41 million one time, and then it's ongoing, bracketed out 239,451,000. And you can see there are, if this bill were to pass, what happens when you have a fiscal note like this, once it gets over to the Senate, it would be tabled generally on third for fiscal impact. That's what they call it. So what they do is they kind of set it aside. They don't have it pass on third reading in the Senate, or it could be over in the House. If it was a Senate bill, it would be kind of tabled on the side over in the House until it received a green light from executive appropriations that it's been funded, it's been selected. So you're correct, sometimes it'll be in the bill itself, they'll actually fiscal note it. Other times they might take it into consideration and then put it in the final budget bill. So it just depends. There's two different ways.
Thank you. And I asked partly just for clarification of processes. We're working, this will apply to other bills where there's a fiscal note and they come to our agency and they prepare it and say, this is what it'll actually cost. So, all right, thanks. Member Hart, Vice Chair Hart.
Yes, when it's all said and done, how many scholarships do they anticipate this scholarships being available?
That's a good question. I would guess 40 million divided by 8,000. Let's see. I should have anticipated that question, Board Member Hart. Does anybody know 40 million? So about 4,200 to 4,300 kids is what I'm hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from board members? Member Norton and then Member Straight. Oh,
I just need some clarification. As I read through the bill, I got lost in some places. Have they specified, or is there a pathway set aside for how this funding is going to be once they have the students selected, and how is that funding going to be sent to the entity or the family or whomever to get that? And then if that changes, so I mean, are they doing that right up front, you know, from day one? Is that when the money's going to go? And then if they change it, how does it get transferred to the next, you know, because we're talking choice here. So if I find that this was not my best choice and I need to change that, does the funding then go to the next school as well? Yeah, the provider, sorry.
Yes. So what I understand from the bill is that as soon as an application is approved and the eligible student is selected to be a scholarship student, there's a scholarship account created on behalf of the student. And that scholarship account, probably from day one, so let's say July 1 or August 1, whatever they end up doing with the deadlines, that account would be created in the student's name, and I would imagine $8,000 would immediately be deposited in there. And then they would approve students until they had all their accounts set up. And then that account, from what I understand, the funding from the account, and this is where, you know, I reviewed this 2 days ago, and now I'm wishing I had reviewed it all again in detail. But my understanding is there's two different ways. Students in general might attend an eligible school, like a private school, and that might be one way that a student decides or the family decides to use their $8,000. A second general way would be to engage or receive services from an eligible service provider, and that. So, and both an eligible school and an eligible service provider have to be approved by the program manager. And then the program manager, they would for the school, I believe the program manager might transfer the money directly to the school, whereas if for an eligible service provider, the family would demonstrate an expense that they had. So whether it's I wanted a tutoring service, or here I paid for this AP exam, or I bought this laptop, and then they would demonstrate that they had bought a laptop or paid for the tutoring services, and then they'd be reimbursed from out of the $8,000. So it's almost like their own account that they can draw down on as they demonstrate that they've paid for eligible expenses, and the program manager would say, yes, that's an eligible expense, and here's your, $200 for the, and I know AP exams probably don't cost that much. Maybe I should say $50. I honestly don't know how much they cost. But let's say it's an AP exam cost of $50. Here's your reimbursement.
Follow up?
Yes.
So as I understand, the way that money is sent now is in 12 monthly payments from USBE to the individual LEAs throughout the state. So it's broken down into those 12 funding payments. That would be a hybrid of that. So there would be some of it goes all at once, and other portions of it go as receipts are. And who's going to be doing that accounting, that financing? That'll be a whole new department.
Program manager.
That would be the program manager who would facilitate all of that. I was just looking through to see the payments made to either the eligible schools or qualifying providers. And it looks like some funding might go from the program manager directly to the school or the approved provider. Because there are eligible expenses, though, that I don't see would necessarily have to come through a provider, I would imagine a parent could also submit for expenses.
There is that back end opportunity.
Yeah.
I was just concerned about, that extra workload, but I'm also concerned about what happens when they change and, go to a new eligible provider, whatever. Will that money still be there that it can transfer over? Or did it all go to the first one? Because I think it'll be hard to get it back.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is in a scenario that maybe you're saying is they enroll in a certain private school, for example, an eligible school, and then maybe the eligible school requires full payment up front, and then a month in or 2 months in, the student and the family decide that wasn't a good fit. And your question is what happens then? And I would imagine, and I'm looking to see if the proration is in here, but I will say this, 2 things. One, we have rulemaking, and I don't know that that's one of the areas that the legislature is requesting or asking us to engage in rulemaking, but there is also the program manager has the authority to establish not rules, but something similar to what would be the program protocols or policies and procedures. And so I would imagine that maybe the program manager would provide some of that structure and answer those questions.
Thank you. Brent.
Member Straight, sorry.
Yes, I was writing down things. Just a question off of Board Member Norton. Who is the program manager accountable to?
Good question. So I guess 2 things. There is an annual report that the program manager makes to the Education Interim Committee each year, as well as I forgot to mention that the State Board of Education is also required to do an annual report on the cost effectiveness of the program. So in some ways, I would say the legislature, they're accountable to the legislature. There is a portion of the bill that also allows the State Board of Education to essentially revoke the program manager's authority. And a lot of that would probably be a combination of what we include in the RFP and what is in code. So the RFP, if the program manager, let's say, I'm sure this wouldn't happen, but let's say that a program manager just stops providing services. They get the money and the applications come in and nothing happens, right? That would be a breach of contract under the RFP. So if there's accountability there as far as the contract that we engage with the program manager. And then there's also some oversight responsibilities of USBE, for example, appeals. That appeal process will be a check on the program manager. If the program manager denies a student, the student and the family could appeal to the State Board of Education. So there's a couple of layers of accountability there.
Program manager sounds like a group, not a single person. Anyway, a couple other questions. You mentioned that it's up to $8,000, so it's tiered. How many tiers are there?
There's actually no tiers. Like, I think I remember last year, you'll remember one of the scholarship bills had, a 1 WPU amount for a certain household income. But this one doesn't. It's up to $8,000 per student, regardless of income. The only preference or the only way that the household income comes into play is getting that preference for being one of the first to be selected to be part of the program. But that $8,000 is flat amount for all scholarship students, regardless of income. But if you are coming from a family that's lower income, you have a higher likelihood of being selected to participate in the program. The other thing is there is a preference as well. Once you're in the program, you have a preference to continue in the program in continuing years. And I believe there's also a sibling preference. So if your older sibling was a scholarship student, then once the student gets to the right age, they would have a preference as well.
Okay. Also, you mentioned that the 8,000 will be modified each year based on the percentage of WPU. My math tells me that 8,000 become at 6% year over year. The 8,000 in 12 years becomes 16,000. Okay, that's at a 6%. I believe the WPU is around 4,200. That means that 6% in 12 years, that will be 8,400. So we have a diverging line of increase. And yeah. So that alone, if it's a straight up 6% increase year over year, maybe that's not the case. I see Deputy Jones may have some additional information.
Deputy Jones, go ahead, sir. Finish, please.
I'm finished.
Okay. So the information I have are specific to Board Member Strait is yes. I mean, what you're doing is conceivably that we're on that trajectory. Trajectory is an acceptable term.
So in 24 years, it'd be $32,000 and 16,800. Anyway.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Deputy Sullivan?
I was just going to add something, but of course, only want to do it when Deputy Jones is right by my side, because I would like him to correct me. But what I understood is how you get to the 8,000, because I think I've heard, and what I'm maybe reading into your question is, the WPU is one number. This is a different number than the WPU. What's the difference between the WPU and the 8,000? And what I understand is the 8,000 takes into consideration all of the funds that students are eligible for, not just the WPU. So for example, a student with a disability also qualifies for the special education add-on. A student who participates in a CTE course also is eligible for the CTE add-on. A student who qualifies or is at risk for academic failure is another additional add-on. So all of that funding, not only above the line, but below the line, I believe, Deputy Jones, they took the funding in total and then divided it by the number of students to get to the $8,000. And that's probably why you're seeing it's not just the WPU, but it's the other revenue as well.
So it's inclusive.
Mhm.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is there anything in the bill that, speaking to that, is there anything in the bill that addresses the ability of the local school providing the services? So in other words, you want to take a foreign language class and you want to take that at local high school. Can you use your money to then purchase a service at the local high school, or does it have to be outside of that? Or, and since charter schools are public, the charter school as well.
Yeah. So actually, your question is a question that we as staff have had. We have not provided feedback to the sponsor because we were waiting for the state board to have this discussion today. But there are many questions that staff have, and what you just asked is one of the questions. And let me phrase what the question is. The question is, if a scholarship student, would they be eligible to engage in dual enrollment, meaning, let's say a student wanted to take 1 or 2 courses at their local boundary high school or a charter school that's near them. They wanted to take choir or they wanted to take physics. Currently, a private school student or homeschool student has the legal authority to do 2 periods here and then do the rest homeschooling or at their private school. Because in this case, though, the student is receiving $8,000, I did see one line at about 912, 913 where it referenced LEAs as an eligible school, which is why I think I'm kind of tracking with you. Does that mean that for scholarship students, instead of participating in dual enrollment, or there's a section currently in code that talks about online charter school, private school students' participation in extracurricular and co-curricular activities. Currently, LEAs don't charge like $700 or $800 for that course. They might charge the fee, like $100 for the instrument or $100 for the music and the choir outfit. But we were wondering the same thing. Would the students still be able to participate in SOAP, for example, or would they pay for the SOAP course out of their $8,000? Same with if they wanted to do essentially a concurrent enrollment course or a physics course that was only available at the school, would they pay so that is a question we have, and a question we have about how the student either can or should or shouldn't or can't, just to explicitly be very clear about how scholarship students participate in SOAP, concurrent and extracurricular activities in a public school or even dual enrollment. So those are questions we have that we are recommending that maybe the sponsor clarify what the legislature's intent is there.
Okay, so now that brought another question.
But can I
Go ahead.
add to that? And I know Leanne's waiting patiently. But can I add that now I forgot. So good. Go ahead.
Carol, let me finish
I've
real
got a
quick.
couple lights. Was it Member Wood and Member Norton?
Still finished.
Mine's
Brent?
really quick. Really
Brent?
quick.
Go
I
for it.
apologize.
No, go for it.
So all these different add-ons may or may not apply to any specific student. And at each different grade level, it applies much differently from the elementary to the junior high and to the high school, where you have all kinds of different formats. So many of these dollars are below the line, not above the line, as stated before. So what's really here is the WPU provides those flexible dollars. If we're given a straight up 8,000 flexible, it's not quite the same thing because it's based on an average, which may or may not apply to any student, may or may not be a part of that average, whether they're special ed. And if you're taking then special ed students, if they're not accepted by a school, let's say, they're not taking special ed students.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're creating greater liability on the part of the public schools in regards to that, which doesn't build into the average the same way. Anyway, I think that was a statement, not a question, so I will be quiet now.
Thank you. Comments or questions or statements are all welcome. Member Wood, and then Member Earl, I believe, and then Member Hart.
Thank you. So if a scholarship student re-enters the public education system, the program manager removes the balance and returns it to the program for other use. How will then that student get funded within the public education system?
So if I may address that, and I think it really goes to what Deputy Superintendent Stallings was saying earlier, Andrew was saying earlier, is we really need that level of detail. My biggest concern right now is systems, right? And the processes that take that. If, depending on who the program manager is that's selected, I would also ask or encourage that we codify or mandate that they have a sufficient system to enable transfers of funding back and forth. I mean, I'm not sure, I didn't extrapolate or say that it's very clear that does the money return just to USBE and then we redistribute it? Or, so that is a very good question. And I think it's something that actually really needs clarity on, right? About what we stipulate is necessary for the program manager to have, right? The capabilities to do that. So, Chair, my response is I don't know. I don't know yet because I don't see sufficient system emphasis on this to enable that process to take place, no matter where they intend the funding to get returned to or by the program manager. That's my response, sir.
Thank you. Member or Vice Chair Earl and Vice Chair Hart.
Yeah, I just had two things. So on line number 693, you'd asked about the prorating, and it does indicate that scholarships would be prorated according to if they transfer, if they switch services. I just in general, I'm just saying there's some of that built in there. And then the other question had to do something around the LEAs, and it does look like in here that there's an I'm looking at line 890, something about an LEA being eligible to receive scholarship funds. So I don't have the answers to the questions that were asked a minute ago, but I'm just saying that there is some reference to possibly what you're referring to. I don't know the ins and outs. This is just a quick read this morning. So
you were correct. Thank
Yep.
you, Board Member Earl.
Yep.
If you look at 890, it is explicit that LEAs may be an eligible service provider.
oh,
Thank you, Vice Chair Hart.
Yeah. For special education students, in my reading there was, but I fell asleep twice trying to get through this, so I feel very shaky. Can you clarify special education and how special students served under an IEP are addressed in this bill? What happens to their services? What happens to or what doesn't happen more specifically? Thanks.
Yes. So similar to what happens if a student participates in the Carson Smith Scholarship Program or the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program, this bill states that once the student elects to participate in the program, that they let go of or lose their rights to receive services under IDEA. We did have a question about how equitable services would apply. So, and this is where I'm channeling Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees and maybe even Deputy Jones. You give me an assist if needed. But there are federal funds that are provided or there's a provision that states that LEAs, the districts, provide equitable services to private schools for students who have a disability. So we were a little unclear as staff about how that equitable services provision works, or if it's meant to apply here or not. But in general, when the family elects to participate in the program, they would be rescinding or revoking the LEA would no longer have the responsibility or duty to provide services to that student under IDEA.
Chair, I have a follow-up. So based on the information that said that an LEA could be a provider, if the LEA provides services, but yet the program means when you go into the program, you relinquish services, does that, what is is that conflict addressed in the bill currently?
No.
I don't think
Okay.
so.
Next question, I wrote them down because not enough sleep. Hold on. Also, speak to the guidance on how programs are chosen or approved. Is there guidance in the bill, or is that something that USB will be expected to make rule around?
I do not know. I need to look at the
Okay,
bill.
no,
If
and
I can look.
I don't
Do you
think it has
remember?
that specific.
I didn't think so either.
I'll say right now that having read this bill, fallen asleep, woken up, reread it several times, right? I do not see that level of specificity to answer your question,
Yes.
to answer Vice Chair's question, Chair.
I
Vice Chair.
appreciate that, and I'm in the same exact
Yeah.
place. I'm not sure what I dreamed and what I actually read. I'm also, follow up?
Sure.
I'm also wondering if these are questions that are being recorded by staff somewhere that we can ask the sponsor and maybe get clarification on, and then a report back on some of these questions. Is that
Angie's doing
our strategy?
Yep, Angie's doing that right now.
Yes, I'm
Fine.
I'm doing it real time because you guys are thinking of things that I hadn't. But we also do have a number of questions and feedback from staff that, and maybe I could share this with you all later, but we would like to share them with the representative. We have not yet at this point, but it'd probably be a good idea.
And was there information about background checks for program providers? Wait, what are they calling them?
Yes.
They did?
Managers.
I'm, okay, thank you.
Yeah,
There was that.
It's running together.
I know the schools and the program manager for sure.
Food service providers.
May I
Thank
just
you.
state, I did notice for sure the program manager and eligible schools do need to have their staff get background checks. I can't remember about the eligible service providers, so we could check on that.
Thank you.
Member Bogus, I believe, and then Member Norton. Did you have that up? No? Okay. Might be Member Lear, but Member Bogus is up first, and then over to you. Yes. Oh, let's see.
No.
There you go.
Okay, so Superintendent Stallings, I have a few questions. Hopefully I can get through them quickly. Who oversees the appeal process? I don't see that language in the bill. Would it be USBE staff or the USBE Board of Education?
Well, that would all be developed in rules. So it does say the State Board of Education shall enact rule regarding the appeal process. In general, every duty of the State Board of Education, including the office, is always given first to the State Board of Education. And then the state board delegates the duties to the superintendent, which is staff. So historically and traditionally, an appeal process like this would be, you would say the superintendent shall, and you as the board would say in the rule what you want staff to do with that program, like create an application, post it online, review an appeal within so many days. And that is what would be in the rule, and then staff would implement the board's directive as outlined in the rule.
Okay. What would the verifications, because I don't see this in the bill language either, but maybe what are the verifications for low income? Can someone just check a box and then we don't verify, or are we going to ask for verification documents? What does that look like? Because I'm not seeing that in the code as it's written.
I agree. I'm looking, I don't see anything about those criteria. So either, depending if the board wanted to engage in developing or describing that in board rule, we could, although there is a line in this bill that states that the state board may not create rule that's overly cumbersome or, I can't remember the exact line.
Yeah, I know it.
You probably saw the link.
Yeah.
So the other, I guess it would be left to, if we don't do it and the statute is silent, the program manager would make the determination of what they want as far as evidence or documentation.
Okay. The bill itself uses the language agreement. I noticed you used the word contract. Are you using those words synonymously and interchangeably?
Yes, in general, we, before we would enter into an agreement with a program manager, we would go through a request for proposals process. It's under the procurement code. It's very public, it's posted somewhere, then people apply, et cetera. But the end result or the end product would be an agreement, is that correct?
Would be a contract, would be an obligating document to that program manager. Yeah, so agreement and contract are synonymous. That's my response, Chair.
And then my final question, I believe, is if I could direct your attention to lane 326. It says supplies and other equipment related to scholarship students' educational needs. And this is very broad language. And let's say you have a student who's interested in piano and they're on this scholarship. Pianos are not little musical instruments on the taxpayer dime. And I also think of things like being interested in welding or woodworking and learning those skills. At what point does line G there on 326 become the purchase of personal property for scholarship recipients and their families? Can you address that for me?
Chair, if I could just ask Board Member Vargas to clarify, meaning do they have the authority to purchase personal property?
Well,
when a student does that, is that?
I'm just, as I see this as the program manager, should this pass, the legislature is authorizing the purchase of personal property.
Yes. Yes, they are, ma'am.
And some of these things aren't cheap, like table saws aren't cheap before woodworking, and it's an educational opportunity. Then that scholarship is not used for a service, it's used to purchase personal property.
So my understanding, if I may, Chair, just real quick, is the model is similar to that that's used in Arizona, where when the parent or family or guardian makes the choice of the school, depending on, it could be a school that has particular curriculum related to the arts or things like that, that they're fostering the ability for the purchase of supplies, personal property for use by the student.
I have no response to that.
That I understand that.
Chair, I believe that's it, but maybe a follow-up. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Member Vargas. And we do have a hard stop at 1:45, but we've got about 10, 12 minutes. So,
sir, can I clarify on the fiscal note to Board Member Lear's question? Okay, we did submit, so we submitted an original fiscal note. We submitted an amended fiscal note to request 2 FTEs ongoing effective FY25. As it stands right now, though, the fiscal note only supports funding for 0.25 of an FTE. So Dale Frost has reached out to Ben Leishman to see where that's at. It could be just a delay in the publishing of the fiscal note, is why Deputy Superintendent Stallings doesn't see it yet. So we did submit a fiscal note that specifically requests that by FY25 we have sufficient funding to support 2 FTE within USBE to help manage this large program. That's fair. At this point, we do not know. That's correct. Yes, ma'am. But that's where it is in the process right now, Chair.
all right. I believe we have Member Davis on the call-in. Are you with us, Member Davis?
I am. I just have heard a lot of numbers floating around. I want to just double check my understanding. So is our current WPU flexible dollars 4,038? Do I have that understanding correct? And then the other dollars that aren't part of that $4,038 are not flexible dollars. Some students will never see those monies that are below the line restricted funds if they don't like ride a bus or participate in some certain program or something. And so those are $4,000 flexible dollars. The scholarship is $8,000 flexible dollars. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of her question, Chair. So I'll just repeat it. So she's saying that her understanding
is that the $8,000 is flexible so that, you know, if by way of what school is chosen, right, if the amount is not necessary because of these concerns that have been brought up about the type of student, that there is flexibility that they would get less than $8,000. Is that what she said? Over?
Is that right, Member Davis?
No, may I? No,
Please,
no, may I correct? I'm asking if my understanding is accurate. Is the current WPU $4,038? Those
Yes,
are the
current
only
amount.
flexible dollars that we have to educate kids, because everything else below the line, some kids never see. Is that correct?
Currently, yes, yes. The below the line programs are specific to those line items or those particular programs, yes. But
Okay,
see,
thank you.
I do need
just
to,
want to make
I
sure.
do need to, well, if I may, Chair, just real quick. Above the line programs, there's restricted programs above the line too, right? There's the add-on programs. So where Board Member Davis is saying the 4,038 is flexible, well, yes, and that WPU value though, the funding that goes into the add-on programs is restricted funding and is designated for students that meet that criteria. So I'm just a little reticent to fully acknowledge or agree to that 4,038 is fully flexible. You know, I mean, it is intended to support individual students, which is why you do see those add-ons above the line. So,
Member Davis, did that answer your question? Did you have a follow-up?
Yes, actually, that's helpful. So what I really need to be looking at are unrestricted dollars versus
Yes, ma'am.
below the line and above the line, because even some of the WPU dollars are restricted. So that helps me to look at, you know, it seems like the $8,000 per student is fully flexible with no restrictions, basically, and the 4,000 that we currently have
now
in
I
a
see what you're
public ed
saying.
system, some of that
right.
is restricted, but it's the most flexible that we have. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
That helps.
yeah.
Thank
Well, so correction on my part, 4,038 is the one each amount for every student. Then you bring in the add-ons, right? So I see what she's saying now. So yes, 4,038 is for every student, but then you know you have to consider the add-on amounts as well as we get within that too. So
okay, let me turn. I think I saw Member Klein and maybe Member
That's
Bogus.
helpful. Thank you.
Member Klein. Oh, and Member Davis, do you want us to come back to you for a follow-up? I couldn't hear.
No, it's okay. I just think we need to be looking at apples to apples here, and the apples to apples really are $4,038 and $8,000, depending on if you go to a public school or a private school. Thank you.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Member Klein? Oh, thought I had you.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. All right, on line 514, it talks about the program manager creating a description of the methodology the organization will use to verify a student's eligibility under this part. I was under the impression that all students were eligible.
Yes, I believe that methodology is probably speaking to the preferences, right? If I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but maybe they have a methodology on how they're going to calculate whether it's 200% or below.
That's right. No,
Yeah, you agree?
I do. Well, and that was another question that I had, the confusion that's brought in by adding the term out-of-program homeschool student, where that is the one that doesn't receive the funding, and a homeschool student is now one that receives funding, forever redefining what homeschool is in the traditional sense, which really confuses things, and I think will probably create a lot of other issues where homeschool is mentioned within code elsewhere. And so, you know, if they want to designate it, it probably should be switched to be
in-program homeschoolers and just leave the term homeschool alone to avoid confusion in other code. And then,
Did you want a response to that or just a comment? Sorry.
do you have a response?
I was just gonna say, I can add it to our list of feedback to provide as a question or a comment.
Because I know the term was put in there to create protections for those that don't take the funds so that they don't end up being put in a position where they can be regulated, but it actually is doing the opposite and opening them up to regulation by the state. And then on around 523, it talks about the program manager has no involvement in guiding or directing any curriculum standards. I think or curriculum or content is mentioned elsewhere. I'm not seeing that right off, but my question is there anything in the bill that precludes USBE from guiding or directing curriculum or content or curriculum standards for those that accept the money?
So just a quick note, we've got 4 minutes. I think we have a hard stop on the room. So please, Deputy Stallings, yes, we got 3 minutes, sorry.
I just wanted to try and repeat your question to make sure I got it. You're asking if there is anything in the bill that would state that USBE may not impose content restrictions. I would think that the language, I think that might be what is in 524 through 529, where it says the state board shall ensure the agreement does not impose any requirements on the program manager, meaning that when we draft the agreement, USBE may not, as part of that agreement, impose any requirements on the program manager that, quote, are not essential to the basic administration of the program or create restrictions, directions, or mandates regarding instructional content or curriculum. So I think that's what those lines are doing.
Okay, so follow up.
Yep, 3 minutes.
It says, is this keeping USBE from imposing its standards on those that take the money, on the curriculum and providers that they use? Do they have to follow the state standards? Also, to add to that, are those that take the money, do they receive a waiver from all of the other administrative rules, state and federal laws around education? And if so, does that include those that use the public education system as a qualified provider?
90 seconds.
That is a large question. And I would say in general, first of all, the program manager is not an LEA. So any of our Utah code provisions or our board rules that say an LEA shall or an LEA may not, generally would not apply to the program manager, an eligible school, or an eligible service provider. The one caveat, you noted the same question that I think Vice Chair Hart did, is what happens when an LEA, though, is that eligible school or program services provider? I think we need more clarity on that. And again, I think to your general question, you wanted to know all the requirements that are in Utah code that are on LEAs that either the legislature or the state board have enacted. Do those apply to the program manager, the eligible school, or the eligible service providers? I don't think they do unless they were explicitly mentioned here, meaning I think that language that you said on 528 through 529 or 527 through 529 sends a message. The legislature is saying to the Utah State Board of Education, you may not, like in the agreement, say, oh, and by the way, you're subject to all of our administrative rules, right? I think that's prohibiting us from doing that in the agreement.
Okay, we got to wrap it there. Thank you, board members. We've had a request from a member to compile the questions and answers and circulate if that's possible, so we can further review and think about it. This is not our room, and so we need to vacate, so I'm seeking a motion to adjourn.
Motion to, so moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, legislature, for letting us use your facilities.
Yes.
We're out.
I feel like I'm like a, what are those that,
Squatter?
squatter, that's the word. Squatter. clarifying.